My name is Grace Anderson, and for 15 years, I was the family disappointment. While my younger sister Isabella collected Harvard degrees and job offers that would make anyone's head spin, I found fulfillment teaching art to children at a public school in Queens. The contrast between our lives couldn't have been starker. Isabella's world was one of wealth and prestige, while mine was defined by modesty, and for my parents, that was enough to make me feel invisible. Isabella had always been the golden child. She graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law, was handpicked for high-paying jobs at prestigious firms, and flaunted a life of luxury that anyone would envy. Last week, at her graduation party, everything was laid out before her. My parents handed her the keys to a Tesla and a deed to a penthouse in Manhattan worth $13 million in front of 200 guests. They praised her as the only true success story in the family. I stood at the back, barely noticed, just like always. It wasn't that I resented her success. It was that it was the only kind of success my parents valued. As I watched Isabella be celebrated, I couldn't help but feel my own worth slipping further into the shadows. I had spent years in that same family, working tirelessly, quietly, building something meaningful in my own small corner of the world, but it was never enough. My parents didn't see me, not truly. They only saw the world through their narrow lens of material success, of Ivy League degrees and six-figure salaries. To them, teaching second-grade art was something anyone could do. It wasn't worth celebrating, certainly not worth the attention they lavished on Isabella's every move. I had worked as a teacher for over a decade, and each day I went to my classroom, a small, often overcrowded space, to teach children who were struggling. Many of them came from immigrant families, and I made sure that every child, regardless of their background, felt seen. I wasn't just teaching them how to paint. I was teaching them to believe in their own potential, to find joy and confidence in their creativity. But my parents didn't know any of this. They never asked about my work, never understood that I had built a thriving art therapy program serving hundreds of children with disabilities across 3 boroughs. They didn't know about the awards I'd received or the letters from grateful parents who thanked me for changing their children's lives. They didn't even know about the nights I spent, working late into the evening, just to ensure that my students had the supplies they needed. Instead, they only saw my career as something small, something unimportant. They compared it to Isabella's achievements and came to the conclusion that it was, in their words, beneath the Anderson family name. Isabella's success was the only success, and every time they praised her, they reminded me that I would never measure up. They were proud of her, and yet they never truly saw me, not as an individual, not as someone who mattered beyond the walls of my school. The story always played out the same way. My parents would host extravagant dinners, making sure everyone knew just how successful Isabella was, while I quietly slipped into the background. Every Christmas, every family gathering, I would be reminded of my place in their world, a place that never seemed to measure up. I'd smile and nod, pretending that I didn't mind, that I didn't feel the weight of their disappointment in me. But deep down, it hurt. I would never be Isabella, and that was something I had accepted long ago. What hurt more was the realization that my parents would never value the work I was doing. It was as if, in their eyes, I wasn't even worthy of the recognition my work deserved. They never understood that I was building something far more meaningful than anything Isabella could ever achieve in a corporate boardroom. I was changing lives, one child at a time, while Isabella was building an empire of her own. I thought I had accepted it, the constant comparisons, the way they spoke about me like I was an afterthought. But last week, something happened that changed everything. It was the night of Isabella's graduation party, and I had been dreading it. I knew it would be all about her, and I would be relegated to the back, a mere spectator in my own family's celebration. But I showed up anyway, because I was still holding on to the hope that my grandfather, who had passed away years ago, had seen something in me that no one else had. He had always believed in me, even when my own parents didn't. He had always told me that I was meant for something bigger than what they could see. That night at Isabella's party, I wasn't expecting anything to change. But then, something extraordinary happened. As I stood there, quietly nursing my drink in the corner, a man in a charcoal suit approached me. He handed me an envelope, his gaze sharp and knowing, like he was waiting for something. "Your grandfather knew the truth," he said softly, his words barely audible over the hum of the crowd. What happened next left my entire family speechless. I stared at him, confused, wondering what he meant. But before I could ask, he was gone, disappearing into the crowd just as quickly as he had appeared. I opened the envelope and found a letter, one that would change everything I thought I knew about my family and my place in it. It was a letter from my grandfather, written just before his death, and it revealed a secret about my family that I never could have imagined. The letter was brief, but the words hit me like a freight train. It was a letter from my grandfather, written just before he passed away. As I read, my mind raced, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The letter confirmed everything I had ever suspected about my family. It wasn't just about wealth or status. It wasn't about climbing the corporate ladder or wearing the right brands. It was about something far more valuable, something my parents had never understood. The letter stated that my grandfather had been watching me all these years, quietly observing the impact I was making in the world. He knew the work I was doing with children, the sacrifices I had made, and the difference I was making in their lives. He saw through the shallow facade my parents had built, a facade that only valued wealth and status, and he knew what truly mattered: kindness, service, and love. In the letter, he described me as the one who would change everything, though not in the way my parents expected. I read the letter over and over, trying to absorb its meaning, trying to make sense of how it had remained hidden from my family for so long. My grandfather had left me something. Not money, not property, not a portfolio of investments, but something far more powerful: the truth. He had understood what my parents never would. The things that truly matter in life aren't measured in dollars or degrees, but in the way you touch others' lives, in the impact you have on the world around you. At that moment, I felt a rush of emotions: relief, anger, and a deep sense of purpose. My grandfather had always been the only person who saw me for who I truly was, and now it was clear. He had left me a legacy that my parents would never understand. As I stood there, clutching the letter, I felt the weight of everything that had happened in my life. For so long, I had been trying to prove myself to my parents, trying to earn their approval. But no matter how hard I worked, no matter how many lives I changed, it was never enough. But now, I realized that it wasn't about them. It never had been. It was about staying true to myself, about continuing the work I loved, and about fulfilling the vision my grandfather had for me. And then it hit me. I had a decision to make. I could continue down the path of pretending to be something I wasn't, living in the shadows of Isabella's success. Or I could step into the light and claim the legacy my grandfather had left for me. The choice was mine, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to make it. I tucked the letter into my purse and walked across the ballroom, my heart racing with anticipation. I needed to find Harold Whitman, the man who had given me the letter. I knew he had something more to tell me, something that could change everything. As I approached him, I noticed the way the room seemed to quiet down, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for what was about to happen. Harold gave me a small nod of recognition, as if he had known this moment was coming. "You read it, didn't you?" he asked softly, his voice barely audible over the hum of the crowd. I nodded, still trying to process everything. "I did," I replied, my voice shaking slightly. I never knew. I never knew he saw me the way he did." Harold smiled, his eyes full of understanding. Your grandfather always knew, Grace. He knew you would change the world, just not in the way your family expected. I felt a lump form in my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. But I knew one thing for certain now. My grandfather had seen my worth when no one else did. He had understood that success wasn't about the things you could buy or the titles you could earn, but about the difference you made in the lives of others. I took a deep breath and looked at Harold, my resolve hardening. "What happens next?" I asked, my voice steady now. Harold's gaze flicked to the front of the room, where my parents were still standing, oblivious to the storm that was brewing. "You've been handed a gift, Grace," he said softly. "But there's more. Your grandfather left you something. Something that will make the truth undeniable, not just to you, but to everyone who's ever doubted your worth." I felt my pulse quicken as I realized what he was saying. My grandfather hadn't just left me a letter. He had left me a way to prove my worth, a way to claim the legacy that had been kept hidden for so long. But what was it? What was the next step? Before I could ask, Harold turned to face me fully, his voice low and calm. "Grace, your grandfather had a plan. He knew this moment would come, and he knew what you needed to do. It's time for you to step forward, to take what is rightfully yours. The world is waiting." The words sank in, and for the first time, I felt ready. Ready to claim what had always been mine. Ready to stand up for what I believed in. Ready to show my family and the world that I was more than just a teacher. I was a force to be reckoned with. The room seemed to shift as Harold led me through the crowd, his presence commanding attention. My family was still blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit. My father, standing at the front, raised his glass in a toast to Isabella, the golden child, as if nothing in the world could threaten their carefully constructed reality. They were still celebrating her accomplishments, her perfect life, unaware that everything they believed to be true was about to be turned upside down. We stopped at the edge of the ballroom, where Harold looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and resolve. "Grace, this is your moment, but before you take it, you need to understand something. Your grandfather knew how hard this would be for you. He knew you would be facing not just your family's expectations, but your own doubts. It's time to let go of those doubts. You have something they'll never understand, and now you get to show them." I looked around the room, taking in the marble floors, the towering chandeliers, the laughter that seemed so hollow now. It was all a facade, a beautiful, sparkling lie. Isabella, with her flawless Harvard Law degree, the Tesla, the penthouse, she had it all. But what did she have beyond that? What had she really contributed to the world? The thought made me almost laugh bitterly. She had been handed everything, and in return, she had given nothing. I, on the other hand, had spent my life giving what little I had to others, teaching, healing, serving, and it was all done in silence, without recognition or reward. But now, I had proof of my worth, something my family could not ignore. And for the first time, I was ready to make them see it. Harold handed me a folder, the weight of it heavy in my hands. I opened it carefully, my heart racing as I saw the first document inside. It was a will, but not the one I had been expecting. This was my grandfather's will, the real one, signed and sealed, and it contained something that would change everything. "Read it," Harold said softly, his voice carrying a sense of urgency. I scanned the document quickly, my breath catching as I processed the words. My grandfather had left me the Anderson family estate, all of it, the company, the properties, the investments, everything. But it wasn't just the financial legacy that struck me. It was the conditions attached to it. The will was clear. The inheritance would go to the granddaughter who demonstrated true service to humanity, not just success in the corporate world. It wasn't about degrees or salaries or fancy cars. It was about impact. And that, I realized, was something Isabella would never understand. She had excelled in a world that prized numbers and status, but she had done little to help those who truly needed it. She had built a career on her resume, not on her compassion. In contrast, my work had been rooted in giving, in serving, in teaching children who were often forgotten by society. That was what my grandfather had seen in me. And now, I was holding the document that proved I had earned the legacy he had left behind. I looked up at Harold, who nodded as if to confirm that I had read it correctly. Your grandfather knew exactly what he was doing, Grace. He knew you were the one who would make this family's legacy something worth remembering. He knew that despite everything, you would rise above the comparisons, the judgment, and the expectations. And now, the time has come to claim your inheritance. Not just the estate, but the legacy of purpose your grandfather had in mind for you. I felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of relief and empowerment. The weight of the past 15 years of being overlooked, dismissed, and undermined by my parents began to lift. I had something that was mine, something no one could take away from me. I had proven my worth, not through wealth or status, but through my actions, my impact on the world. As I looked back toward my family, I knew it was time to step forward. I couldn't let this moment slip away. I couldn't let my family continue to define me by their narrow standards of success. I had something far more important to offer. I had a legacy of service, and it was time to make them see that. I walked back into the heart of the ballroom, the weight of the will and the truth in my hands. My parents were still laughing, oblivious to the storm brewing. Isabella stood at the center, still basking in the glow of her achievements, still living in the world they had built for her. But that world was about to come crashing down. I cleared my throat, the sound loud enough to catch the attention of the room. My father's gaze flicked to me, his smile faltering when he saw the determined look on my face. My mother's eyes narrowed, already calculating how this moment would reflect on her carefully curated image. Isabella's smug expression shifted to one of confusion, then frustration, as she saw the documents in my hand. Grace, what is this? My father asked, his voice laced with irritation. He had no idea what was coming. I held up the will for everyone to see. This, I said, my voice steady but firm, is my inheritance. Not just the money, not just the assets, but everything that belongs to this family. And it's mine because I've earned it, through my work, through my impact, and through the choices I've made. The room went silent. My father's face turned pale, and my mother's jaw clenched. Isabella's mouth hung open in shock, her perfect world crumbling before her eyes. You can't be serious, Isabella said, her voice trembling. This is ours. It was always meant for me. I shook my head, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of my lips. No, Isabella. It was meant for the one who knew what really matters in this world. And that's not always the person with the highest degree or the most expensive car. Sometimes, it's the person who chooses to serve, to give, to change lives without expecting anything in return. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Every eye in the room was fixed on me, some in shock, some in disbelief, others in quiet admiration. It felt surreal, standing there, holding the will, watching the realization sink in for my family. My parents, who had built their entire identity around wealth and status, were now faced with the truth of what my grandfather had known all along. True success was not measured in bank accounts or prestige, but in the lives you touched, the difference you made. Isabella stood frozen, her face a mask of disbelief. You can't just take everything. This is absurd, she said, her voice high-pitched, laced with a mix of anger and panic. I've worked for everything. I earned it. I looked at her, no longer the timid, overlooked sister who had silently endured years of comparisons. No, Isabella. You've built a career based on the right resume and the right connections. You've chased status, but you've never built anything meaningful. Not like I've tried to. I've spent my life helping children who had no voice, giving them hope, teaching them to paint their dreams. My success isn't in my bank account, but in the smiles of every child whose life I've changed. That's what my grandfather understood. I turned to face my parents. Their eyes were wide, filled with disbelief, and the kind of fear that comes from the realization that they had misjudged everything. You taught me that success was about wealth and status, that those things were what truly mattered. But I've spent my life seeing beyond that. I've learned that success is about impact. My grandfather knew that. That's why he left me everything. My mother, who had been silent up until now, stepped forward, her voice strained. Grace, please. This isn't the time or place for this. You can't just upend everything like this. We've built a life. Your sister has earned her place. I shook my head, feeling a surge of resolve. No, Mom. You've built a life based on appearances, based on who has the most, who's the best, who's the most successful in the world's eyes. I'm not playing by those rules anymore. I don't want what you value. I want what I've earned. I want to continue building lives, making a difference. And I'm doing it with or without your approval. I turned back to Harold, who had been standing quietly off to the side, watching everything unfold. He had seen it all before, and now I knew he was waiting for me to make the final move. Harold, I want to take this legacy. I want to honor my grandfather's wishes. This estate, the company, it's mine. But it's not about the money. It's about what I can do with it, what I can build. I'm going to turn it into something that truly matters. Harold smiled, his expression proud. You've made the right choice, Grace. Your grandfather believed in you. He knew you were the one who could turn everything around. As I stood there, feeling the weight of the decision settling in, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in my life, I was stepping into my own power. I was no longer the disappointment, the afterthought. I was the one who had been quietly changing the world, and now it was time for everyone else to see it. My parents were silent now, their faces pale and drained of the confidence they once carried so proudly. Isabella was still processing the reality of what had just unfolded, her eyes flickering between me and the crowd that had begun to murmur in disbelief. The power dynamic in the room had shifted, and she knew it. For the first time, she wasn't the one everyone was focused on. The attention was on me, on my choices, on the legacy I was claiming. I walked over to the stage where my parents had been standing, now seated in stunned silence. The crowd was waiting, their eyes on me. I could hear whispers, but they felt distant, like I was in a bubble, removed from it all. The photographer, who had been capturing Isabella's every move, was now snapping shots of me, his camera flashing in rapid succession. I stood at the podium, the weight of the moment finally sinking in. I don't need your approval, I said softly, but my words rang clear through the room. What I need is to do what's right, and what's right is to use this inheritance to do something meaningful. I'm not here for the cars, the houses, the money. I'm here to build a foundation that will change lives, just like I've been doing all these years. The Anderson Foundation for Art Therapy and Special Education will be my legacy. It will be a place where people don't just work for a paycheck, but work to make a difference. I looked back at my parents, their expressions a mix of shock and guilt. You wanted me to be someone else. You wanted me to be Isabella. But I've never been her. I've always been me, and now it's time for you to see that. It's time for me to stop being invisible. The crowd was still, hanging on every word. I could feel the shift in the air, a collective sense of something monumental happening. This wasn't just about the inheritance. It was about the truth. It was about proving that success wasn't just about wealth. It was about purpose, about living a life that mattered. And for the first time, my family was finally going to see it. Isabella stood up slowly, her face pale, her eyes red. She walked toward me, her steps hesitant. When she reached me, she didn't speak at first, just looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. "I never knew," she said, her voice cracking. "I never knew what you were doing. I've always thought, I don't know, I thought I had to be the best." I smiled, my heart heavy with the weight of everything we had been through. "It's not about being the best, Isabella. It's about being the best version of yourself. I've always known that." She nodded slowly, the realization finally sinking in. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of the sister I had always wanted. The one who wasn't trying to outshine me, but who saw me for who I was. The ballroom was still quiet, waiting for what would come next. But I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The real work was just starting. The air in the ballroom was thick with tension, but it was a different kind of tension now. It wasn't the kind that came from competition or comparison. It was the kind that stemmed from truth being laid bare. I could feel the weight of my family's scrutiny, but it no longer had the power to crush me. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a place at this table, and it was a seat I had earned on my own terms. As Isabella stood there, her face flushed with a mixture of guilt and disbelief, I could see that something had shifted in her. It wasn't just the shock of the will being revealed. It was the realization that perhaps she had spent too much of her life chasing the wrong kind of success. I had always been the quiet one, the one who got lost in the shadow of her accomplishments. But now the spotlight was on me, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. "You can still change, Isabella," I said gently, watching her struggle to find the right words. "It's not too late. You don't have to keep living in the world our parents built for you. There's more to life than degrees and titles. You just have to decide what kind of person you want to be." Isabella looked at me, her eyes filled with the weight of years of unspoken competition. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. It was a rare moment of vulnerability from her, a moment when she was forced to confront the truth that had been hidden for so long. She wasn't the only one who had been living a lie. We all had. I looked around the room at the guests who had been silently watching the spectacle unfold. Some were still trying to process the bombshell that had just dropped, while others had begun whispering to one another, sharing their thoughts on what had just transpired. I could feel their eyes on me, not with judgment, but with a growing sense of respect. They had witnessed the unraveling of a carefully constructed image, and in its place, they had seen something real, something raw and unrefined, but ultimately powerful. And that was the difference between my family and me. They had built a world based on appearances, on what could be seen and measured by others. But I had built a world based on the unseen, the lives I had touched, the children I had helped, the families I had supported. It was a world that wasn't about recognition or validation. It was about creating a lasting impact. "Grace," my father finally spoke, his voice shaky, his authority slipping away with each passing second. I don't know what to say. We've made so many mistakes. I see that now. I've spent my life measuring everything by wealth and success, but I never stopped to see what you were doing, what you've been doing all along." I looked at him, my heart heavy with both sadness and understanding. "Dad, I never needed your approval. I just needed you to see me. But it's not too late. You can still be part of this. You can still change." My mother, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. "I don't know how we got here," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know where we went wrong, but we've been so focused on the wrong things. Grace, you were always the one who knew what mattered. We should have seen that." There it was, the apology I had never expected to hear. It wasn't much, but it was a start. My parents had spent their lives chasing a dream that wasn't theirs to begin with, and now they were finally beginning to understand what truly mattered. Isabella, still standing beside me, looked at me with a new sense of clarity in her eyes. "I don't know what to do now," she whispered. I feel like I've wasted so much time." "You haven't wasted anything," I said softly. "You've just been following the wrong path. Now, you get to choose your own way, and I'll be here, helping you every step of the way." The room was silent, as the weight of the moment settled over everyone. My parents were still processing the truth, their once steady foundations of wealth and status now crumbling beneath them. But there was a glimmer of hope in their eyes, the first real sign of change in a long time. They weren't perfect, and they weren't going to be, but they were finally starting to understand what I had known all along, that love, service, and kindness mattered more than anything else. As the evening drew to a close, my family remained at the center of the room, still trying to wrap their heads around the events that had just unfolded. But I knew that this was just the beginning. The real work was ahead of us, and it was going to take time. Time to rebuild trust, time to rediscover the values we had lost, and time to create something that was truly meaningful. Isabella and I didn't speak much more that night, but as we stood together, I could feel the shift between us. It wasn't just that I had claimed my inheritance. It was that we had both been given the chance to choose a different path, one that didn't revolve around what we could acquire or what we could prove to others. It was a path that led to something deeper, something more fulfilling. "I'll see you Monday," I said to her, my voice light but carrying a sense of finality. "You'll be working with the kids, learning what it really means to serve." Isabella nodded, her face softening as she realized the weight of what I was offering. "I'll be there. I want to learn. I want to do better." For the first time in years, I felt at peace. The battles, the comparisons, the longing for approval, they were behind me now. The path ahead was clear, and it was mine to walk. As the night came to a close, I turned to leave, the weight of the inheritance still heavy in my hands. But it wasn't the money that mattered anymore. It was the legacy I was going to create, the foundation I was going to build, a foundation that would last long after the applause had died down. The last thing I heard as I walked out of the ballroom was my father's voice calling my name, finally acknowledging me not as the disappointment, but as the daughter who had changed everything. "Grace," he said, his voice filled with sincerity, "we're proud of you. We've always been proud of you." I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had already moved beyond the need for their approval. I had found my own path, and that was all that mattered. If this story resonated with you, remember, your worth isn't defined by the opinions of others. It's defined by the impact you have on the world. Choose your path wisely, and let it be one of purpose, not prestige. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories of quiet justice and the strength it takes to stand up for what you truly believe.